So, chronology. What did that have to do with, number one, the Bible, and number two, Tartaria? Well, first of all, for the Bible gives, the king ruled this many years, and then, the Bible gives its own chronology. Now, for Tartaria, this is highly important because for those that are trying to fit the so-called global empire, if you want to call it that, or just just in Asia, and Eastern Europe, trying to fit this in, it's very difficult to do that because there doesn't seem to be a plate to fit this. So that's the first problem many people get into, and I think the reason that they get into this is they hear about this subject on TikTok and Facebook and other things. I didn't hear about it that way. So I came about it in a very different way. So we're going to do it that way because you're going to find it very easy to fit it in once you get over this hurdle. So, and this is the most important hurdle you can get over. And that's the chronological issue. Because I hear vomit coming out of people's mouths. They go, oh, the millennial kingdom of Christ. Good, you're starting to get it. And then they say 70 CE, and that's where it all falls apart. So let me explain what I mean by the chronological problem. This is the timeline you're using. So if you notice my top column, I have, your ancient kingdoms, Egypt, Babylon. You can count Assyria and other things in here. Persia, Greece, and then Rome. And then you get over to this side, and you get the year 0. So, which doesn't exist, by the way. It's just an imaginary concept. But we have before Christ, or if you want to call it BCE. That area is when you place all these ancient kingdoms. Quote unquote ancient kingdom. We'll get to that in just a minute. And that's where you place all these things. And then, while Rome is still ruling, you have the birth of Christ. That's when our actual timeline is based on the birth of Christ. Might not have always been that way. And you get your Anno Domini in the year of our Lord, or your CE Common Era. And right after Rome falls, you get this long period called the Dark Ages. Oh, yeah, right, okay. And you get it to about the year 1000. We'll get to that in a minute. And then you get your Middle Ages, your Renaissance, your Enlightenment, and then you come down 2026, where we are today in our modern era. And notice I put another date there in the Renaissance, 1583. Why is that important? Well, what I'm about to read to you, and this is not my information, this comes from one of the most famous historians of the 20th century, Will Durant. So Will and Ariel, his wife, they wrote Will mainly, but then Ariel joined them later. They wrote, I think, 13 volumes of history. And this one's called The Age of Reason. So, by the way, these are available for free online. If you want the PDF, if you want the audiobook, they're available for free online. So, there's nothing here that I'm reading now that you can't find yourself. So, I have this bookmarked. Here it is. Page 580, Age of Reason, Will Durant. Joseph Justice Scaliger, perhaps the most extraordinary master of general erudition that has ever lived, inherited from his famous father. Are you ready for this? This is in the 16th century. Inherited from his famous father, Julius Caesar Scaliger. You can read it online if you don't believe me. The throne of European scholarship, and it goes on and on and on. He learned Hebrew, Arabic, and 8 other languages, ventured into mathematics, that's important, astronomy, philosophy, which he puts in quotes, and then you've got a bunch of other things here. He had a wide respect for dates in the understanding of history, his greatest work. He did not, which we'll talk about in a minute. So he goes on the correction of dates, 1583, that's the date I just set for you. For the first time, that from Will Durant, a respected historian. For the first time, collected the dates given by Greek and Latin historians. Oh, that's really scientific of you, man. After all, the Greek and Latin historians, they're absolutely accurate in everything they did. Of course. Without given or indicated in history, calendar, literature, and astronomy of Egypt, Babylon, Judea, Persia, and Mexico. Alright, he goes on in 1606, he collected and arranged every chronological item in classical literature. Of course, there's nothing in classical literature that's untrue. And the foundations he established. The first, this is Woodran's words, not mine. The first scientific chronology of ancient history. It was he who suggested that Jesus was born 4 BC. So again, 0 kind of a placeholder. Well, there you have it. 1583 to about 1606, our chronology set standard. Now here's the interesting thing in biblical art. Up until this time period, all the biblical art, and we'll be going through those in a few videos, depict Jesus, the apostles, the Old Testament figures with their own time, or with a time a few centuries before. But after Scaligerian, they start wearing rags. They're out in the desert. Why did that change? Because of Scaligerian chronology, which is the chronology you believe, which is the chronology the Muslim down the road believe, which is the chronology the Christian on the other side of the world believe, which is the chronology the atheist on the other side of the world believe. It's the chronology that more people believe than any religion. One guy, and it was refined later, but one guy basically changed the world by saying, hey, we got all these Greek and Latin historians, let's put this all together, and we got a bunch of histories here, and we got a bunch of histories. They might all be talking about the same event, but we're going to put them out in a series, in this timeline, and by doing this, what did he do? He put all these ancient empires into the past. Far into the past. Now I want to show you something interesting. After you get over these Dark Ages, you get over Rome, you get into the Dark Ages, you enter the Middle Ages, and then what do we have here? What's this? The Renaissance, at the time that he lives. And what are they doing in the Renaissance? Are you sure about that separation? Because it's so much easier if you don't have this BCE era. Once you get rid of that, it all becomes a lot more clear. But that's what he did. That's the chronology that he gave us. Now, with that, here's the thing. You might say, well, okay, but that's the one everybody accepts nowadays. We got all this radiocarbon dating. Okay, the radiocarbon figures that are found, first of all, highly inaccurate. And if you don't believe me, you can go look it up yourself. But even the ones that are found, the ones that don't fit the Scaligerian timeline, they discard. But wait a minute. You're telling me that this timeline is so sacred, so preserved, that when scientific evidence comes up from a radiocarbon date or something like that, and disproves it, you just discard it and say, this one looks like it's more closer to this result, because they get several results. This result fits our timeline. So we're going to use that one. Is that science? No, it's not science. But that's what happens all the time. So let's not even talk about that. The fact is that many, many people came out after this timeline was put into place. And by the way, obviously for the common people, it had very little impact for a long time. But for the educated people, it came into place. And immediately the educated people started reacting to this. There were people that came out and said, hey, you know, those Greek and Latin sources you're using, I think they were all forged a few hundred years ago, in the last few hundred years. The Renaissance. People at that time. And then we get Isaac Newton. The last book he wrote, The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms Amended, trashes this chronology. This is one of the greatest scientists that ever lived, supposedly. His last book, destroyed. Again, you can look at, you can get it yourself. Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms Amended, PDF, bang, done, over. Easy to find, easy to download. Nothing I'm saying that you can't find. Edwin Johnson, he looked at the Pauline epistles. He said, I think these are added. And we'll be getting into that. He said, I think these are all from the Middle Ages. Mozart. By the way, all these people, the majority of them are mathematicians. Because this is math. Mordor, Russian mathematician, wrote a huge volume called Christ. He completely redated everything hundreds of years, thousands of years later. People laughed at him. You won't be laughing once we get several videos into this. It's not a laughing subject. So as we enter the 20th century, and there's been people off and on that has always argued against it, but as we enter the 20th century, we get into the 1970s, and this is when Anatoly Fomenko started doing his work. And he started his work with science, with looking at lunar eclipses, looking at Egyptian zodiacs, and dating them according to what the data showed. And then, later into the 80s, he started applying it to our Scaligerian timeline, and he found that, yeah, see this arbitrary year 1000 here? We gotta get rid of everything before that and pull it into this time here, right here. All this stuff here happens here. And he showed that using the scientific system. Now, there are some that might want to argue against that. We're not going to do that because I'm going to be using statistics, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that later. But he was joined later by Gleb-Novarsky and other mathematicians. By the way, if you look up Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb-Novarsky, never mind the new chronology that they do, look up their other achievement first of all. Now tell me if you can match that. If you can match that, then you have a rebuttal to that. But we're not going to do that because I'm not a mathematician. So what we are going to do is use the foundation that for the last 40, 50 years Fomenko and Novarsky have laid down, and we're going to work with that. Now, I disagree, but I don't disagree with the math. I disagree on certain things of their interpretation. But for the most part, I think they got about 75 to 80% right. And we're really looking at it together. Because I'm going to be sure there's nothing that I've said on this video that you can't look up for yourself. Everything I'm saying you can look up easily. So, when you have that chronology, several things come into play. First of all, it's very easy to fit Tartaria. Number one, and I'm going to say this right now, this is something that pisses me off, like you can't believe. The person that rediscovered Tartaria was Anatoly Fomenko. So, but coming into Tartaria and going 70 CE or some stupid thing like that, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't. Tartaria is easy to fit in now. Very easy. Number two, where do we put the Bible? Why is the Bible so important? Well, let me explain to you. There are 3 books we're going to go with the Book of Mormon later, so 4 books, but there are 3 primary books that are actually very important to deciphering our history, independent of this. Independent of Gallagher's Jesuit cult, call it what it is, there's this book. This book here, which if you're going to confuse modern Islam with this book, then you can just leave, because that's not what we're doing here. This book here, as a historical text, tells us the early history of Tartaria. I'm going to say that right now. The later history, well, actually the complete history, you find in what's often called the Old Testament. Probably not a very good term. And by the way, we're going to be using this version. And I'll get into reasons for that later. But you find it in that. Now, here's what confuses people, because the other half of the Bible, the New Testament, the Gospel contains some early events, but for the most part, this is the most heavily edited set of texts that you can get. These were the texts that were sitting in churches. These were the texts of monks. Oh, we got to add something here. So this text today quotes the Old Testament right, left, and center. But it wasn't always like that. And if you have a Bible, I would ask that you please do this. Because the New Testament events actually predate the Old Testament. Not all of them, but the Gospel story itself does. And that's important, because in a matter of fact, we can actually save Jesus Christ from all these so-called dying and rising God things by just getting rid of them, because we're not getting rid of them, but saying that, hey, look, instead of Christ, because in a modern timeline, Jesus Christ is way down the timeline. And all these so-called ancient dynamizing gods, they all come before him. But in new chronology, Jesus Christ is at the start of a timeline, so all these other ones, they're all reflections. They're all, in Egypt they had Osiris, Isa, Jesus. They had Krishna, Christ. In India, they're all the same person. They're all the same. They've localized it. This text isn't written yet, but they've localized it. So what we're doing, we're saving the Bible in many ways. In many ways, that's what we're doing, at least at the historical text. When you have the right chronology in place, that is. If you don't have the right chronology, you're not going to be able to do this. So that's the first step for chronology. So I'm going to drop this video, and look, I'm going to put a bunch of links in the video description. You can look some of this stuff up. But my next video is going to deal with geography. We have a geographical problem. We have several geographical problems. I'm not going to deal with North America yet because that's going to be something that we're going to blow people's mind away. But let's just deal with biblical, quote-unquote biblical archaeology. We're going to deal with that on the next video to show that the so-called Middle East, we'll let you get rid of our whole thing, okay? The next video we'll do that. And once we do that, we'll actually be able to locate ancient Israel and Judah. Tartaria? We'll be able to do that next video, beyond a shadow of a doubt. And once we do that, then we'll be able to move into we'll start with Jesus, and we'll work our way out. Because once you got Christ in place, you can get where the patriarchs is, where Moses is, where the prophets are. We can get the 1,000-year reign in place. We can get all that in place. Now, a few of the links in the video description I'm going to be putting down will show you, first of all, well, here, let me put this in first of all. The year 1000, what is that? It's I or J, and then the number. So until the 21st century, if I said I-808, it's not 1808. It's 808 in the year of the Lord. You see that I got changed into a 1 by dumbasses who didn't know what they were talking about. That's what happened. So that's the first chronological, and that explains the 1,000-year discrepancy we sometimes see. But then there's the other discrepancy that Scaliger gave us thanks to his pulling and all these other things. So now you've seen that, we can move on to so-called biblical archaeology. Thank you.